Hey folks, welcome to the Unsung podcast.
Mark, I don't know if listeners noticed, but the second part of our MF Doom show, you introduced it as though you were doing an impersonation of Kevin Bridges, but you didn't actually say that you were doing an impersonation of Kevin Bridges. Were you aware that you'd done that?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Craig, the day before, Craig had watched a little bit of his stand-up on Amazon Prime, and I was like, this is pretty pish.
Do you want to do it again on demand to prove you can? Introduce the show again.
Hey folks, welcome to the Unsung podcast.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's pretty good actually.
Yep. How you's been?
You guys, what about him? Fuck's sake.
Oh, yeah, these guys, what are you all about, Oh. Did you know, have I told you, I might have told you this story before, but Kevin Bridges once called me a little fetus-faced boy once.
Was that at the stand?
No, it was at Belladrum Festival. He was like performing in the late night comedy tent. This is like before he was famous, and it was after all the music had finished, and it had been raining, so I did look like I might have just come out of the womb, had a hood up, and we're all sat on these sofas in this tent waiting for him to come on, and I might have been a little bit pissed, and I went up and did a sort of impromptu dance set with an umbrella on the stage before he came on, just to the 34 people that were in the tent, and then he came on while I was dancing, and he was like, "Oh, who the fuck's this wee fetus-faced fucking boy? Get off my stage, son!" And I went and sat down. So that was fun.
Have you been apart for your celebrity impersonations, Mark?
I've been okay, Christopher. I have been doing fun things like not going out very much and drinking too much beer and being ill. I was actually ill for a bit. That sucked. And then most recently I watched Big Vinnie Mac's House of Beef, the Royal Rumble, on Sunday. And
it would be a better name for it.
That's an amazing name for it.
It was fine, I guess. How about you guys, Christopher and David?
You watched any oiled men getting to grips with each other, Dave?
Just only in my afternoon daydreams.
Just at work.
Yeah, exactly. No, nothing exciting has happened to me at all. I bleached my hair this time last year for the first time just because I was bored, and you know what? You know, the rest of the year went so well. I've just decided to do it again because it was obviously such a good omen. So I'm rocking my Eminem and 8 Mile vibe right now. How are you,
Chris?
Me?
Yeah, how about
are you buzzing for this episode?
I mean, honestly, like I'm a wee bit run down. I spent this week looking at spreadsheets, and today I was helping move stuff out in office. It was tiring, but I'm game. I will get my energy because this is a big hitter. This is one of those, when we first conceived of this, we were like, there's certain names here that are going to make a mark when we drop them, and I think Faith No More, the subject of today's podcast and probably next week's, are one of those names. They're one of those big hitters. And I think the album that I've chosen is kind of perfect for what we do as a podcast as well, because it is an album that sales wise and also reception wise was much more muted than what came before, what propelled them to stardom. But I completely stand by my proposition here. So yeah, we're going to talk about King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime.
What if I have forgotten how? Cut my losses and get out now. Get out right now.
To give it its full title, which may be abbreviated to King for a Day, or even just King, as the podcast grinds on towards its third hour. But yeah, this came out in 1995, and I was not even fully into heavy music at this point. I mean, I was and I wasn't. I was kind of getting to grips with it. I think I was 14. It was right in the cusp of when I first started to listen to this kind of stuff. I remember specifically being at a French exchange disco at Stirling Rugby Club. David, I'm sure have you been there? You've certainly passed by it a number of times.
Yeah, I think I went to somebody's birthday party there once.
Yeah, so it used to be one of the places in Stirling where you'd have these little parties or events and stuff. Our school had a French exchange program, and I remember going there with there's only a few of us really that were outliers enough to enjoy this sort of stuff, and there was just a moment during the night. Kind of who was the DJ? It might even have been the great Ewan Duncan of Europa Music in Stirling. It might even have been Ewan. But there was a period during the night where they dropped all the sort of Barbie Girl and Wigfield just briefly, and embarked on like a few songs back to back that were for the moshers. And I specifically remember not even identifying as a mosher at that time, but Digging the Grave and Smells Like Teen Spirit came on, and I was up there. I didn't really even know how to mosh, and we weren't dressed for moshing. We didn't have the hair. We hadn't quite realised who we were, I think, but it definitely connected. And so that was just as this had come out, and it was right in the cusp of me really fully kind of realising this was the kind of music that I really enjoyed. I didn't have any older siblings, not many siblings, so I didn't have that kind of advantage of hearing like an older relative or even a cousin or that playing much stuff to latch onto. So yeah, it's weird. It's like a really significant record for me in that sense. And it's endured really, really fucking well. It's endured as well as most albums from that era for me. I think we've spoken about Live Through This by Hole, which I think's aged really well. Obviously a couple of the Nirvana things, but even then, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think this album still has a certain freshness and an absurdity to it that's helped it last. I'd be curious to know what your impressions are of it off the bat before we start to dig into the band and the history.
Well, I'm a Faith No More fan. I have been for a while. I first heard Epic on Crying TV, like in 2000 and fucking whatever. Probably when they weren't abandoned. They wouldn't have been abandoned anymore at that point, because they broke up after the next album for a bit, didn't they?
Album of the year,
yeah. So I remember hearing that and thinking, that sounds really familiar. That sounds a bit like Korn, but not, a bit 80s.
Smell it, taste is so sweet, but it makes no difference 'cause it's not your fault. You want it all, but you can't have it.
Well, we're definitely going to end up touching on the new metal aspect.
Well, yeah,
again.
like obviously they're on record as saying the Real Thing is like one of their biggest influences. But I'd heard that.
Can I just throw a morsel in here, by the way? Did you guys know that in February 2020, a month before coronavirus really took off big time, Faith No More announced a co-headlining tour with Korn?
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
I don't think I saw that. Fucking hell.
That's what was meant to be happening right now. The other bands in the building, the other bands included Helmet, so it was really like a kind of new metal progenitors meet new metal kind of granddaddies. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was meant to happen. It got announced in February and then clearly didn't happen. But hey, Dave, they could just have been postponed, man.
Well, we can hope. Can but hope. Fucking hell.
I mean, it's weird though, Mark, to think of you getting into, especially Epic, that song in particular, so late, because we'll go through their music, but it's kind of frat rock. You know, totally. that song I don't think has aged particularly well. It's got a lot of nostalgia value for people, but I think if you were coming to it cold, I'm surprised that it's one of the ones that really connected.
Yeah, and then after that I started to figure out who they were. I got This Is It, which is the greatest hits sort of thing, one of the first ones I did, the actual good one, I guess.
Yeah, one of them. Yeah,
and I liked a lot of the stuff that was on it. Angel Dust, fucking great album. This album also very good. I don't think they've really, when Mike joined the band, I don't think they've actually got a fully bad album, but we can talk about that as we go through. I think they get patchy. I think they're patchy in a lot of places, but I don't think they've ever made a total stinker, certainly since Mike's been in the band, in my opinion. And more at the point, since the last month has been fucking great for me, because we did MF Doom and we're doing Faith No More, so it's been a really good time. Dave, what about you?
Well, I was just trying to remember, and it turns out that I got into Faith No More pretty early, because I got The Return of the Gladiators on cassette, and that was the second compilation for the Saturday night UK TV show presented by Ulrika Johnson and John Fashanu.
This has come up before. This is brilliant.
Yeah, so it's like a just a compilation, and it was like of all the Gladiators soundtracks and entry songs and stuff like that. So I mean, there's Billy Ocean, When the Going Gets Tough, Chesney Hawkes, The One and Only, Sister Sledge, We Are Family. So, you know, it's got a bit of the soft stuff. But I mean, it's also got L7, Pretend We're Dead.
Good.
Under the Bridge by the Chili Peppers, Thin Lizzy, Boys Are Back in Town. Do you remember Green Jelly, Three Little Pigs?
Yeah, absolutely.
Little pig, let me. I fucking love that. And it's also got Everything Is Ruined by Faith No More.
It's an interesting choice by Faith No More as well, you know.
Yeah, so that came out in October 93, and I remember I got it on cassette and I fucking loved it. And Everything Is Ruined was one of the standout tracks on that cassette for me as a 7-year-old.
I mean, it's got one of their best choruses in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess I remember going to Inverness Library, and they used to have like a little, you could borrow a CD for 2 weeks, and I was always taken by the King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime artwork. Like, it's pretty fucking iconic. It's amazing. Yeah. And I remember getting that album and recording it onto tape. And then I don't know, it never kind of stuck with me. And then when I was about 14 or 15, I was a qualified Kerrang reader and mosher, and I went and bought the real thing and Angel Dust on CD. And man, I fucking rinsed those albums. I listened to them so much. Funnily enough, I just never got back into King for a Day or Album of the Year or, you know, the pre-mic stuff. To me, Faith No More was always pretty much just those two albums. So it's been interesting listening to this with fresh ears and a sort of critical perspective rather than a teenage just fucking rinsing it.
You bring up a couple of interesting points. You mentioned Red Hot Chili Peppers. I always associated Faith No More with that kind of funk rock, frat rock movement that went on in the States around about the late 80s, early 90s, and it was kind of going in tandem with the hair metal movement, hence why Faith No More ended up touring with Guns N' Roses and all this kind of stuff, which we'll touch on. But yeah, like Jane's Addiction and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Green Jelly, even like Primus, bands like that.
Shows them off to all her friends. One day you know that people try to leave it, so she gave him up with cyclone fans. Along came Lou with the old bamboo.
It's a sound that I never liked as a kid. When I heard Epic, I'm pretty sure before I heard King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, or Dig in the Grave in this case, and it just didn't connect with me. I think in a weird way, a lot of early Faith No More stuff sounds almost like they'd tapped into that thing that Queen did on a couple of Queen's kind of standout hits, like We Will Rock You or something like that, where you get a formula that's insultingly sing-alongy and simple. So like Epic for me, and they do it, they kind of satirise themselves a bit and like Be Aggressive later on, but it's like that kind of thing where you've got like a simple beat and a sing-along chant and a really dumb hook, and it really worked for Queen in that era, and I felt like Faith No More were sort of like a slightly edgier version of that approach to songwriting, and I never really liked it. And it wasn't until I heard the slightly more complex songwriting of this album, and then going back through, as you say, Angel Dust, and being like, oh right, this isn't just big dumb tunes, it's actually some of it's quite dark and some of it's quite complicated. So I never really got into that whole frat rock thing they did, and anytime they touched on that, it kind of turned me off. Look, we'll give them some context. We'll give a wee bit of backstory. All right, so this is an amazing fact, and actually something I didn't know until we started doing this. But in effect, Faith No More formed in 1979.
Yeah, that's mad. Like, 42 years
before I was fucking born. There's not many bands I can say that about anymore. You know, but like they formed in 1979, admittedly under the title Sharp Young Men, which I think later was changed to Faith, full stop, No Man. At that time, it was Billy Gould and Mike Borden. Billy's a bass player, Mike's a drummer, and they were playing with Mike Morris on vocals and a guy called Wade Worthington on keys. Long story short, like Faith No More are known for people like Mike Patton. They're known for even Chuck Mosley, the vocalist before Mike Patton. Roddy Bottom is probably one of the other most kind of like standout characters in the band. But none of them were actually there at the very beginning. Faith No Man had released a double A-side single way back. It was called Quiet in Heaven, and the other A-side was Songs of Liberty. I had a listen to these actually. They're not too easy to find, but Quiet in Heaven is actually really fucking good. It's quite industrial. Has this really thunky bass sound that Faith No More kind of become known for. I was quite impressed with it. Song of Liberty is a bit more post-punk and a bit more indie, less industrial, but also kind of decent. As I say, Morris and Worthington were in the band there. I think they'd actually recorded that as Sharp Young Men and then released it as Faith No Man, but Worthington left really soon after that and Roddy Bottom joined at this point, and that's sort of where it starts to become a more definitive lineup. Bottom, Bourdon and Gould then quit the band to effectively quit Mike Morris, the singer. You know, it's that kind of like they have a sort of semi-habit of doing this, where they quit en masse to avoid firing a guy, but they kind of quit the band and then formed Faith No More, even though it was basically the three of them. And it's actually at this point, which is quite a kind of ubiquitous bit of trivia for Faith No More, that they auditioned various singers including Courtney Love, and she sang in them for a little bit, a really little bit. She's actually really good friends with Roddy Bottom, and that'll play a part when we're talking about this album because of the timing in her life. Obviously Courtney didn't end up in the band. It ended up being a singer called Chuck Mosley. Around about this time, Jim Martin, their sort of fairly iconic guitarist for a large part of their history, arrived as well. It's interesting, I saw Faith No More on The Word with Terry Christian after Mike Patton had thrown a glass of water in his face for getting their names wrong or something. He then went on to just ask them about Courtney Love auditioning for them for most of the interview, and it was really quite insulting. But there you go. Faith No More have got a weird relationship with the media. They're a band that just seem really kind of out of place and out of sorts, especially once Patton's in there, because he seems quite uncomfortable with it. But yeah, so they then began, once Mosley and Martin were in the band, they started to record what became We Care A Lot, but they did it themselves, did it of their own volition, and then they were noticed by Mordom Records, and they funded the completion of the album. And then around about, we'll talk about this phase in a wee bit more detail, and then around about in 1986 they were signed by Slash Records and started working on Introduce Yourself, which came out in 1987. That included a reworked version of the song We Care A Lot. Which was like their earliest sort of hit, and that actually got some early traction on MTV. In 1988 they did a Euro tour, during which Chuck Mosley became apparently increasingly problematic. There were fights with, I don't know if it was like his crew fighting with Jim Martin or something like that. He fell asleep on stage at the Introduce Yourself album launch. He'd suggested
you can get away with that if you're a bassist or a synth player, but when you're the front man, when you're the singer.
And he'd suggested they do like an acoustic record and stuff, and basically Billy Gould especially just got sick of it and he quit. And then I think it was the day after that Mike Bourdon and Roddy Bottom called him and joined them, and so again they quit the singer and they reformed Faith No More basically without Chuck Mosley involved. Also, this is just prior to Mike Patton joining. They auditioned many other singers including Chris Cornell at this stage, which would have been pretty interesting, yeah. And then in 88 they hired Mike Patton, who was a singer of Mr. Bungle at the time, and I think it was Billy Gould, or maybe it was even Jim Martin, had heard one of his demos. No, I think it was Jim Martin had heard one of his demos and suggested them. Now, I know we're skimming through that just to give a wee bit of context, but we did say for this podcast we were going to try and stick to Faith No More. and we're not going to deviate into all the many side projects of Mike Patton.
I mean, we've already done a Tomahawk episode. So.
Yeah.
We did it. Yeah, we did a Tomahawk episode, and we'll probably end up doing at least one of his other acts at some point as well, because he does have a lot of quality stuff. We will give passing mention at this point, I think, to Jim Martin, who, following his dismissal, went on and did some not amazing stuff, including
a solo record.
The Milk and Blood album is fucking honking under his own name. Just so bad, recorded so badly as well. It's just a horrible, stodgy, mellow thrash album that sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like a drunk Lars Ulrich drumming on it as well. A slightly better was what Roddy Bottom had been working on. He was a member of a band called Imperial Teen, which was a good band in its own right, kind of like an indie band. You know, at times they sound like a kind of weird cross of like Bell and Sebastian and the Dandy Warhols, and then at other times they've got stuff that's just a little bit more gnarly with like hints of Sonic Youth or Superchunk in it. It's actually something that's pretty good. They had a record that came out in '96 that's pretty highly rated as well. And Roddy Bottom is just a really interesting character, generally speaking. I'm slightly sceptical, although having given it a quick glance, it sort of seems like it might be true. Roddy Bottom was the first openly gay kind of modern heavy rock metal musician.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and in '93, and I've read some really interesting interviews with him about that. I'd actually wondered when it was that Rob Halford came out. That wasn't until fucking 1998.
Yeah.
So Roddy Bottom is out there on his own. Can we just obviously take a moment to reflect on the obviously quite amusing fact that he's called Roddy Bottom, and he was the first gay metal and rock musician. I don't think even he would grudge us that moment. But yeah, really, really fascinating. It gave Faith No More a kind of like, it sounds really crap in hindsight, seeing as this is something we take for granted so much now, but it gave them a sort of subversive quality. Like, they weren't this macho, groupie fucking metal band. There was something sort of slightly edgier, and they just never really fitted with the other, you know, peers of the metal scene at that time, and likewise Patton didn't really seem to buy into that. I've read really interesting interviews with him talking about how absurd they found the whole notion of groupie culture, that they just never really, he said he saw plenty of other bands, including bands they were on the road with, doing it, but to them it just seemed like those bands hadn't been hugged enough as children. It just seemed kind of pathetic. So immediately, like from an early era, they're a really interesting band and definitely outliers. I do want to say, dropping Faith No More on the podcast could definitely be seen as pandering a little bit. I know for a fact we've got some listeners that are big fans, and it's been a name that's come up in comments and correspondence since we started this. I am not even remotely interested in being your pal here, guys. I think the first two albums by Faith No More are insufferably bad. Yeah, like
dreadful, really dreadful,
fucking horrendous,
truly dreadful,
like horrendous. I understand that there's probably a few of you are incredibly attached to them and shed a wee tear for the original version of We Care A Lot or whatever, but seriously, you need to get a fucking grip. They are absolutely fucking honking. Even just the way they're recorded is horrible. I think like funk rock generally is a total abomination. I think Chuck Mosley was a hack, a really poor vocalist. There's a track called The Crab Song on Introduce Yourself that is just astonishing how bad it is. Like total trash. The vocals in it are hellish. It's got this like weird sub alt metal croon thing going on in it. Yeah, really, really fucking awful in the early days. And I remember when I got into King for a Day, trying to do my due diligence and go back and find stuff, and I think I just, maybe just accidentally picked up those records and was fucking appalled. Am I alone in this?
No, not at all. They're both dreadful albums.
I think the first record is dreadful. Introduce Yourself has redeeming features, although I do actually think that Chuck's vocals are what makes it irredeemable.
Back from where you came, she said with pain in her heart.
I saw somebody compare these two records to Paul Di'Anno on the first two Iron Maiden records, but Paul Di'Anno had fucking character. He was still a good vocalist. He could sing it in tune, and it suited that because it was just like lended a bit more of a punkier vibe. Whereas this, he was just literally just out of tune on these two records. I don't know. Introduce Yourself. I think it's got some. It starts off fairly decent, and I think We Care a Lot is a good Faith No More song. But yeah, it doesn't stand up overall. It's not. It's definitely not a good record.
There's a kind of really bizarre sort of 90s combination of Will Smith meets Sparks meets Devo at this kind of point of Faith No More as well that keeps cropping up. It's really odd kind of comedy jock metal.
Huh? Oh, nothing. Just wondering what it is you're doing. Why it is you're doing that, whatever it is you're doing. Oh, yeah.
I can't get with it at all. A track called The Jungle, I think it's The Jungle on We Care a Lot, which is just synth rock at its absolute worst, like pure mince. Pure fucking mince. It's embarrassing. So yeah, if that's a problem for you and you're listening and you expected this to be pandering sycophancy, it's not going to happen, because I do think Faith No More have made a number of missteps. The early years are inexplicable to me. Then there's a watershed moment. Mike Patton joins, and I want to be clear here as well, a bit like Faith No More, I'm not one of these people that thinks Mike Patton can do no wrong. I've seen and heard Mike Patton do plenty wrong. I think hopefully that was clear from our Tomahawk episode. I think he's a guy that's full of ideas, and not all of them come off. Sometimes he's just a confusing character as well, because like Turin McCorn, he seems so much like a guy that doesn't take the industry particularly seriously. It seems he has a bit of the kind of Steve Albini's about him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they toured with Limp Bizkit as well. I don't see it. But anyway, things really, really do change when Mike Patton joins the band. They're already quite an eclectic band. Their singer certainly didn't have the range or the ability to do even the basics, arguably, let alone anything more adventurous. Patton blows open the possibilities of what they can do as a group, but also, as is evidenced by Mr. Bungle, has his own very, very eccentric ideas and directions that he wants to go in. So he makes an eclectic band more eclectic, I think, and generally improves the quality of their product, allows the other players and writers to really try things they weren't capable of with the previous setup. I will say, though, he does also spend the first 3 years singing through his nose far too fucking often. I hate that voice. I hate it when Patton does the nose voice. It fucking kills me. Like, he's an amazing singer, and that's like tracks like Epic. It totally grates. the real thing is clearly an order of magnitude, at least an order of magnitude more accomplished of an album than Introduce Yourself. Actually, it got a Grammy nomination, I think.
Yeah, Epic did. The album did, yeah.
4 million sales. And as you say, Epic was a fucking huge hit. Like,
I think it's pretty incredible that the record was already written and he just came in and did everything in 2 weeks. Like, it's fucking insane. Like, he literally crafted hooks for vocals out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, which I think is a true testament.
From out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, like a lot of those songs have 3 or 4 big hooks in each track. Like, there's a reason that it, went mainstream, because it's just fucking catchy as hell, and it's kind of got this cross-genre, cross-generational thing that's just like quite, I don't know, they just sound like a vital young band that are producing big fucking hits.
Yeah, I mean, Epic, it was a kind of MTV botherer as well, even though they got loads of hassle for the video because of the fish suffocating in it. The kind of comedy funk vibes in Epic actually never really worked for me, and I always wondered in later years if Patton actually liked that song, because it doesn't seem like a song he'd be particularly fond of, despite the fact I'm sure he's expected to sing it. The lyrics, Faith No More frequently do this thing where I can't tell, certainly earlier on, where I can't tell how ironic they are or are not being, how self-aware they are or are not being. Lyrics like "so groovy it's out of sight." I'm sure to some extent is Mike Patton, well, I'm confident to some extent is Mike Patton being ironic, but I'm not entirely sure at this stage of this band, if you know what I mean. I think their tongue-in-cheek sense of humour, their approach becomes more obvious later on as they get more self-referential and a bit better. They kind of hone the sarcasm a little bit better lyrically, and just even like some of their compositions in their entirety seem quite sarcastic. The fact that they covered Easy, for example.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's why I'm easy. I'm easy like Sunday morning.
But lyrically, I mean, that's something that links Patton to last episode and MF Doom, is that he has admitted that sometimes he just uses words that sound nice. It's not necessarily about the meaning of the lyric, it's about the sound of the word.
Yeah, he was pretty reluctant to talk about lyrics in interviews. I know he used to change the subject to animal porn, masturbation, scatology, anything he could to basically avoid sort of an autopsy on his lyricism.
So he has on record as saying that he didn't really take lyrics seriously as a writer when he was in Mr. Bungle, but he started doing an English literature degree, or maybe he was about to finish one or the other, when he joined Faith No More, and he presented them with a bunch of lyrics, and apparently some of them were like too out there. Just they felt as though they were a bit too extreme, and then Matt Wallace, the producer, had to actually ask him to rein it in a little bit. So I think it's entirely possible that he just was taking a piss. Like he get ripped off Anthony Kiedis from Red Hot Chili Peppers for stealing his vibe, which is, there's nothing less true in the entire world, because he dresses a bit like him in the Epic video, and he raps on a song. You got to think that he's looking at a landscape and going, "Fuck this shit." You know what I mean?
There's some other big songs in that as well. I mean, From Out of Nowhere, as we say, is a total banger. It's a really, really great intro.
Yeah.
Just super, super energetic. Although I think his voice in it again kills me. And Falling to Pieces. Again, nasal, but hell of a good chorus. There's also some really eclectic stuff in this, and I think it sort of foreshadows what was to come. The Woodpecker from Mars track. Is an important track, I think, in the history of what they were doing. And even the last one, End of the World, I think foreshadows a lot of that soft lounge thing that they would start to fuck around with later on.
And do you know what? See, Edge of the World, I mean, maybe it's like the same sort of time.
Is it Edge or is it End?
Edge of the World, sorry.
Edge of the World.
It's the same era, and to me it has the same sort of mainstream crossover but outsider status and kind of surreal imagery as Twin Peaks. And I feel like Faith No More and like David Lynch have a sort of similar vibe to them.
Yeah, the cherry pie, the coffee, the FBI sort of suits thing. Yeah, you're right. It's got that weird suave dissonance to it. Yeah. So it was around about this time as well, between this and the album that followed, Angel Dust, that they went on this infamous tour with Guns N' Roses and Metallica, which is fucking riddled with stories. I mean, they did a bunch of the big tours. They toured with Billy Idol at one point as well. Yeah. But I mean, there's so many stories. This is like peak Faith No More in terms of journalism as well. They became darlings because they were interesting. They had a lot of weird stuff going on. Around about this sort of 88 to 92 period, there were all the stories of drinking bottles of piss on stage in Seville that had been thrown at them. Mike Patton going up on top of Axl Rose's monitor to drink this bottle of piss. There was the shit terrorism. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
Mike Patton became, I mean, he references it in Cuckoo for Caca on the album we're going to talk about, but it was all about his fascination with the potential and opportunities presented by human feces for mischief, such as balling it up and putting it in a hairdryer for the next resident to discover. There was a story went about for ages that he'd shat in a carton of orange juice and then put it back into Axl Rose's personal vending machine, but apparently that's actually not true. It's a sort of Chinese Whispers adaptation of something that happened on a tour with L7, who I think they were really quite friendly with and quite close to, quite fond of. But yeah, I think he'd shat in a carton of OJ in the L7 tour because he'd been challenged by one of their band that they were like, Mike, it's been a very quiet, boring tour so far, so he decided taking it up the ante a wee bit. He apparently used to take diuretics before he went on stage. He'd drink shitloads of coffee and take diuretics and then fill up a jug of piss and then throw it over the audience. And it was people off stage that had spotted what he was doing and were like freaking out, going, is he really going to fucking do that? And he was like tossing it over the crowd. What else did they do at this point? He used to carry a voodoo doll on tour called Toodles. Such a fucking weird band, and like absolute dynamite if you're a writer. Totally fucking like gold. So yeah, before they brought out Angel Dust though, they did a Live at Brixton album, which if you get it on video, it's called You Fat Bastards. VHS, that'll be, guys, just if you're looking for it. There's also a Faith No More You Fat Bastards t-shirt, limited edition t-shirt out there. Some total belters on that. That was I think the version of Zombie Eaters on that is better than the album version. And War Pigs is just so legendary.
Good. So good.
There's also a track in it called the Cowboy Song, which had never been released anywhere else, and it's actually pretty decent. It's pretty strong, certainly compared to other earlier tracks. And then in 92, Angel Dust, which I don't think we could have made a case for being unsung.
No, I don't think so.
Such a revered album. Like, it really is such a revered album. Era defining in a lot of ways. Probably the album that did more to shape new metal than almost any other. Not necessarily in its sound, because it took the funk rock and made it kind of dark, made it really quite sinister in places. But then it also had this effect of making Faith No More really credible. I think a lot of press in particular were on the fence with them around about the time of the Real Thing. They were still a big sort of arena band. They were doing that, as you said, the comparisons with Red Hot Chili's and stuff. They were doing funk rock, and they were a little bit, there was a lot of frat boy sort of stuff happening in the band. This was darker, it was creepier, it was weirder, it was more unsettling. The title of the album, the swan on the cover, which is totally iconic. This is the point that like magazines like NME picked up on them, and that's significant, at least from a British perspective, because NME was a kind of hipster indie kind of cool magazine, and you know, they kind of sniffed at a lot of metal was seen as being kind of stupid and beneath them. They very rarely covered it unless it was from that sort of weird fly in the wall perspective of I don't know, tourism or something like that. But with Faith No More, they seemed actually quite into Faith No More. They had like that edge that made them somewhat credible, and I think that came at this point. It basically cleared out some of the cobwebs, I think, of the pantomime and the kind of naff funk of the kind of Mosley era. Like it really swept that away. I mean, the tracks in this, Dave, I'm sure you could go through them at length. I always thought Midlife Crisis was an absolute standout.
A screamer, man. Screamer.
Yeah, Midlife Crisis is amazing. I mean, do you know, it's interesting, like, going through it critically, you realise that, like, some songs don't necessarily go anywhere, but they're all about mood and ambience and, like,
yeah, that's true.
Like,
that's
cranking
true.
up the weirdness.
All of their albums are too long, I think. Even the great ones are too long.
Yeah, and I mean, they had this thing of, you know, or certainly on these two records, of sticking on, you know, like the covers at the end. You know, on this you had Midnight Cowboy, and then they put on Easy in 1993 as well, which is kind of iconic. Great, like they did it really well, and it works. But yeah, you're probably what is it, about 55 minutes long? Probably this record. Oh no,
an hour.
Yeah. And I mean, like I fucking love this record, but there's probably some fat to be cut off it.
Yeah, I will say that the thing is, as you say, a lot of the songs are on here for colour, but see, some of them for me are some of their best works, because like the likes of RV, the fourth one, so weird, that kind of like sort of spoken, drawled narrative.
My feet itch. Yeah, I'm here to scarecrow.
I mean, it's just Patton. You can really see him sort of starting to make his impression at this point, and you probably hear a lot of Roddy Bottom as well, because that's kind of more in keeping with what he ended up doing with Imperial Teen. But I mean, I think that's a big song in their arsenal because of what it enabled later on. Smaller and Smaller is one of those tunes that I think is just really there for like vibe. Everything's Ruined is a huge chorus. I mean, that is like maybe their best chorus. It's a fucking absolutely brilliant song, and I love the video for that. The video for that song was one of the things that really made me switch on to Faith No More.
Yeah.
And realise they were something different. They mock themselves so well in that video. You know, it's so nice to see a big band that has a nice sense of its own, the absurdity of its own situation. I think it's fucking brilliant. Malpractice on that. Starts like fucking Melvins. It is literally starts like a track off the darkest Melvins album. It gets really goth, loads of synth in it as well. This is still the period when Roddy Bottom was really, really prominent. Be Aggressive, I think, is a really, really significant song in the band's history. It's, again, a bit like I was saying about that Queen thing, where you get like the vocal chant. But it seems to be, again, quite self-referential. It's like a cousin of We Care A Lot. You know what I mean? It's got that kind of group shout thing, but it's much more, I don't know, it's much more sinister. Funnily enough, Roddy Bottom get interviewed many times about being a homosexual man coming out so early and being out there on his own. Be Aggressive, he wrote the lyrics to that song.
And the music as well. He's a sole writer for that song.
And that part, I swallow, he was like, yeah, that's meant to mean exactly what it means. He was like trying to kind of be really confrontational. He wanted to demonstrate to people that he hadn't been hiding. It wasn't like he came out and he'd been trying to keep it a secret. He hadn't been trying to keep it a secret. It it had just become knowledge, wider knowledge, when the band had become more prominent. And I think that's an important tune for him in that sense, and I'm sure for a number of many gay metal fans, whether they were aware they were gay or not at that point. A Small Victory, I think, could easily have been in King for a Day. It's the one that sounds the most like the future.
My favourite song on the album is A Small Victory.
Yeah, it's mine too, because there's something really, I don't know, nostalgic and euphoric about it. It's not like necessarily that heavy a song, but it's just fucking quite optimistic and naive and nostalgic, and you can imagine like cruising about the early 90s in LA, you know, guilt free.
I love it. See the percussive nature of the vocals in it at the end. It's so good. The multi-vocal takes are very
that's
percussive.
Fucking brilliant. Yeah.
And Jizzlobber, a big song for the band, actually. Like Jim Martin really going to town on the metal side of it. You know, they were really big fans of Metallica. I think they actually got on really well with Metallica. They did not get on with Guns N' Roses on the road. That much was made very, very clear. But Metallica and them seemed to get on pretty well, and they were a metal band, and certainly Jim Martin was a metal guitarist. But that song was actually a song that they said they weren't really able to do it when they were doing the stadium tours, when they were doing the kind of Guns N' Roses tours. It was too heavy for the crowd. It really didn't work. But as soon as they went and did their own headline shows, that was the first one in the team sheet, if you will. It was the first one that they added because they had the ability to do it and it get a proper reception.
Yeah.
It's also a song where for the first time you hear Mike Patton cutting loose with his vocals. It's fucking minging, the vocal take on that song. It's ferocious. He does that screaming, snarling thing, like you realise what a good heavy vocalist he was, and he just really emphasises it in that. Curiously though, Jim Martin left because of this album.
That's not entirely true.
Well, they left him, he left them. That's sort of undecided. What he did do was he said that this album sounded like gay disco, and he was not a fan of the direction that the writing was going.
True. I can clear that up. Yeah, so it was very published. So this is from an interview I did with Loudwire a few years ago. My publicised not being into Angel Dust was all about the way the process went down. There was a lot of weird pressure to follow up the new thing, and as a consequence, he felt it was very contrived musically than he thought was necessary. He wanted more of the record to happen in the studio, and Bill Wallace wanted every last track nailed down before we went in. He wanted to spend time with it. The management and the record company wanted to rush out the door. There were journalists all over the place. They were paying for samples that they could have just created. Matt Wallace kept phoning him to complain about Mike Patton's vocal performance. Management kept phoning him to talk about Mike Patton's desire for outside projects. And then the record company said to them all in the studio, "I hope nobody's bought houses." Because they were like, that's when reality slaps you in the face. The pressure was on, and everybody wanted to be in the studio while I recorded, endlessly tinkering and fucking with me. And Matt is already a really fucking wound up guy. Prior to this album, I would work alone with Matt and his assistant engineer, period. I had to kick everyone out the studio, and it pissed everyone off, even though we'd done it before. But live performances were always great. From that perspective, they came across a lot heavier than the records. Over time, things would change, progressions and arrangements would morph in subtle ways that would make the set heavier than the studio version. So he said there's a lot of bullshit in the press and there was a lot of negativity, and he tried to avoid being part of it by refusing to do interviews. But he was generally unhappy with the way decisions were being made that would prove damaging to Faith No More, which is why he left.
It's interesting because Patton, I'm pretty sure it was Patton and Gould were interviewed about Jim. As I understood it, he was just generally unhappy with the musical direction as well. And when you hear what he went on to do, it certainly tracks that he had other ambitions musically, and they fucking suck. And I'm not surprised if the band and him were diverging based on where the two products went. So maybe there's some ambiguity. I mean, that's the thing with Faith No More. In almost any of their breakup stories, there's a lot of ambiguity. But certainly the versions of it that I've heard about Jim Martin, other than that one, do seem to track. But then, as you say, maybe there almost certainly is another side.
Well, he says I'm really happy with the way Angel Dust is now regarded and how positive it's regarded. That's quite an affirmation of the legacy that we worked to create. I'm aware that lots of newer bands have noted Faith No More as an influence, and I'm also aware that it's regarded as one of the most influential albums of all time. He's not surprised by it, but he says I don't think anyone can anticipate something like that, but he's not surprised by a legacy that it's created. It's interesting as well because I don't think we'll really talk about this, but he heard King for a Day and thought that's too much Mike. That's too much of a Mike project. So he was like, that's not really Faith No More to me. So he obviously left at the right time because it was going in a direction he obviously wasn't very interested in. But
it does seem like there was a bit of friction between him and Mike Patton, though, in terms of their musical inclinations. Like, I think Jim is a bit of a stodgy cornball dinosaur. Yeah. In a lot of ways. I mean, certainly the Behemoth, the project that he did, which is like southern, what do you call it, like redneck metal or redneck, I can't remember redneck sludge or something like that. It sucks, actually. It's really, what I've seen of it, it's honking. So I can understand if Mike Patton was looking for something leaner and a bit edgier, and he'd seen that it was really working as the band got darker and a bit more earnest, a bit less pantomime. And maybe Jim just didn't fancy that. It does seem to come across from the interviews that him and Mike didn't go on. I think the irony was that it was Jim that had originally heard Patton's demo and sort of brought him into the band. But yeah, I don't miss Jim Martin and Faith No More. I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you're probably right. If King for a Day is almost certainly a more Mike Patton-esque record, but for me, clearly from my perspective, it's for the better. It's interesting that when Jim left, two of the people that got auditioned, Geordie Walker from Killing Joke and Justin Broderick from Godflesh. That would have been fucking beefy if Justin Broderick especially had joined the band. I could have seen them definitely going in a slightly more industrial direction. Probably King for a Day would have sounded quite different. But like when Trace Bruins came in, at least to record King for a Day, he and Mike already had a relationship from being in Mr. Bungle, so that really helps as well. But yeah, so 1995 is when they brought out King for a Day, and I mean that's probably a good time to break. Because we've only got a couple of records to cover after that, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of this album itself. What do you think?
I'm into it.
Yes.
I'm into it.
That sounds good.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing about talking about King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime is it's like talking about 10 albums, because there's like 10 different fucking sounds, at least, on this record. So yeah, there's probably quite a lot to get through. I guess just to leave off on that, I think, like, as I said, for me, coming to Faith No More, I was most enamoured with this edgy, lean, much more sinister latter day band, and I hated the early stuff. I will say, like, Goldilocks zone wise, I can understand, Dave, why you're so into Angel Dust and Real Thing. It is a sort of, well, certainly commercially, a much more successful symbiosis of the two sort of of the two sensibilities that existed within the band. I think you guys could probably have guessed that the later stuff would probably appeal to me more anyway, just given the kind of stuff that I listen to. It's a bit more alt-rock, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, there's so many great moments, certainly in The Real Thing and Angel Dust. I think they're fantastic albums. I don't think Angel Dust would have been a contender just because it is so revered.
I think The Real Thing is, a big pop rock, alternative rock record, and I don't think it's underrated, and I don't think the Angel Dust is either, because it's seen as a alternative metal classic. So
yeah, aye, and the first two are humming. Yeah. So thus far everyone checks out. Okay, doke, guys. Well, I'm into it. Looking forward to coming back and talking more about these mad fucking shit terrorists.
One more thing before we leave this episode is we know that sometimes we talk about this Patreon thing that we have, right? And
nobody listens.
If you want to donate to that, then you can. But sometimes we also know that long-term commitments are maybe not for everyone, and that's totally fine. So, as of, well, I guess as of you hearing this episode, if you go to unsungpod.net/donate, you can either sign up to our Patreon, or you can just chuck us a few quid in a tip jar, buy us a coffee or something. It can be any amount that you want. So if you go to unsungpod.net/donate, you can chuck some money our way, either on an ongoing basis or just on a one-off. And finally, big hello to John Kumiski, who is our new subscriber. Your benefits are in the ether.
They're in the Brexit post, so sorry mate, it could be months.
Alright team, see you next week. I'll actually see you in 4 minutes after I do a pee, but I'll see everybody else listening next week.
Fairly well.